The next element that we'll talk about is the cross section. And this is an overview of the 5 basic through cross sections we're looking at. A, B, and D have 2 through lanes. A is the most narrow width at 39 foot wide with a separate bike ped bridge. B is the narrowest of the alternatives that has bike and ped facilities on the bridge at 57 feet wide. D has bike lanes as well as multi-use paths, and it's 64 feet wide. C shows 3 through lanes with bikes and peds on a lower deck. And E has 2 through lanes for vehicles and then 2 dedicated lanes for transit. And it's the widest, including the bike and ped facilities, at 75 feet wide. Here in the comparison on this slide that shows the impacts of the cross sections for autos and trucks, you can see the full widths that I've just given you, and then the curb-to-curb widths. If you look at the 3rd row, where we're talking about the flexibility to accommodate emergency vehicles, A and E are the best with a high accommodation. A has a 6-foot shoulder not designed as a bike path, because remember, bikes are on separate bridge. E has transit lanes that could be converted for emergency use. So those are the best for emergency vehicles. C and D have shoulders with some space that can be converted, so that's the next best with moderate accommodation. B is the worst for emergency vehicles because it has narrow lanes and narrow shoulders. In the 4th row, where we're talking about flexibility to meet future transportation needs, that relates to the ability to add future capacity. And this is directly related to the width of the bridge. The wider it is, the more flexible it is. On the bottom row, flexibility to meet future transit needs, E has dedicated transit lanes, so it's the best of these alternatives. But it doesn't rate high because at this point there are no plans to put dedicated transit from Oregon 43 onto the bridge. So we have a short length of an improvement on the bridge in the middle of a longer corridor. In terms of the impacts of the cross sections in relation to bicycle and pedestrian use, in the 1st row of this table, all alternatives provide a barrier from motorists. So A and C are completely separated, as we talked about, because either they're under the deck or they're on a separate bike ped bridge. But look at the relationship between the 1st row and the 3rd row, which is about security. That's the flip side of the separation issue. A and C pose security concerns because bikes and peds are separated from eyes of motorists. In the 2nd row of the table, alternative D has the most width dedicated to bike and ped facilities, so it would be considered the best in that sense for bicycle and pedestrian users. This slide shows the impacts of the cross sections to transit use. In the 1st row, we see that only E has dedicated transit lanes. This provides flexibility for future enhancement of transit or streetcar options on the bridge and would provide an immediate queue jump for transit use on the bridge now. In the 2nd row, there are bus stops in the interchange area. Alternatives B, D, and E allow for efficient connections to bus stops located right in the interchange area, but connections to bus under alternatives A and C would be north of the interchange area, so that's a little less desirable. All alternatives connect to the future planned streetcar line from Lake Oswego to Portland. The last of the elements that we're talking about are the replacement versus rehabilitation of the bridge. And the interesting thing here is that there are very few key differentiators between those 2 options. The construction cost varies a little bit, but there's an overlap. The cheapest alternative is replacement, and we'll get into more detail about costs in the next section of the presentation. With regard to bridge types, the rehab is obviously limited to a truss structure while there is a lot more flexibility with bridge types for the replacement options.